Okay.
All right, my name is Erik Bendix. I've been dancing since I was 10 years old. I started in a school in Switzerland called École d'Humanité. It's an international school. It had kids from all over the world, and folk dancing was something that we did for social, getting together and having fun. Let's see, I grew up in California. I guess when I came back from Switzerland, in high school I was in an Israeli folk dance performance group. And then when I went to college in England, I was busy trying to stay out of the Vietnam War, so I was overseas. And while I was in college, I belonged to a Balkan dance group that the people were, a lot of them were kind of Slavic specialists, and they went to the Balkans every summer and collected dances. And then when I got done with college, I went with them and spent the summer of 1973 in Macedonia. I studied with Peca Atanasovsky. I went to his camp and traveled around in Bulgaria with Yves Moreau and just all kinds of stuff. And then I guess the year after I got out of college, I went back to the Swiss school that I'd been at and was a teacher. And that's when I started teaching folk dance. That was, I guess that was also 1973. So I've been teaching folk dance since then. I live here in Asheville. I do most of my folk dance teaching on the road. I teach workshops in Europe and in California. I still go back there, and then sometimes here. And I actually, Rusty Maynard and I basically founded this camp, the Mountain Play Shop. Don't ask me when. It was like 20-something years ago. I don't know, 25 years ago or something. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell.
So who do you think there was anyone who you looked up to over the years that was your maybe mentor, or you really kind of not idolized, but...
Definitely Peca Atanasovsky was, I would say, in many ways my main teacher. I hung around with him for years and really took his dances in very deeply. I also learned a lot from Mile Kolarov, who was I don't know how many people remember this, but he came to the States in the 1970s and taught a bunch of people. He was more a musician than a dancer. He taught a bunch of people how to play Macedonian music. There was a group called Novo Selo that was based in Philadelphia that kind of became a backbone of the Balkan music and dance camps. And what's less known is that while he was here, he also ran a dance group, and I was one of the lead dancers in that. So he was another Macedonian mentor. I guess in Bulgarian dance, not that long ago, more like maybe 20 years ago, I worked with a guy named Ivan Donkov in Veliko Trnovo. Learned a lot of northern Bulgarian dancing from him, had an incredible time. There's an Armenian dance teacher in Paris by the name of Eddie Jalolian, who runs an Armenian performing group there. I learned a lot of Armenian stuff from him. I guess I've learned a lot as I've been out there as a folk dance teacher. I've co-taught I've been at lots of workshops where I was one of several teachers, and I always get a lot from the other teachers. So Eddie, I co-taught with Eddie Jalolian and learned a bunch of Armenian stuff. I co-taught with Henny Connings and learned a lot of Russian dancing. I co-taught with Yves Moreau, and he and I go way back. And I guess one of my mentors and friends and heroes in Balkan dance is Steve Katansky. We go way back. I met him in Macedonia back in 1973. We've danced together for years and years. I kind of lost touch with him, and then last spring he was teaching in Tennessee, and I went and reconnected with him. I love his material, and I love his whole attitude and take on the just he has such deep knowledge, and he's a very soulful dancer, and I love hanging out with him. For many years, I in addition to helping to start Play Shop, I also helped found a folk dance. Well, originally it was a week-long Christmas camp in Switzerland. It then has sort of blossomed into camps throughout the year, and music camps and trips to the Balkans, and anyway, it's this whole big thing, but it started as a winter camp. And for many years, I took turns teaching that workshop, and the years that I didn't teach it, Bianca de Jong taught it. She's a big name in Balkan folk dancing in Holland, and we spent, I don't know, 10, 15 years taking turns and never meeting each other, and then finally we met each other, and I learned a lot from her. She's a fabulous dancer. And gosh, who else? Sonny Bloland years and years ago, Nick Hilferink for Romanian dancing. And then I guess a whole other chapter is in the last 15 years, maybe 15 years. I've spent a lot of time with Michael Alpert, who taught me Yiddish dancing or klezmer dancing, and he and I and Zeph Feldman and a bunch of other people have been reviving that tradition. So I've been fairly involved with that. I taught 2 summers. There's a Yiddish dance camp in Germany that I taught at, and I've just done a lot of that. Taught out at the Jewish Music Festival out in California, which was, let's see, that was about a year and a half ago. It was a particular thrill for me because my son plays the music, and I got to. It's been many years since we've been able to gig together, but we got to again a year and a half ago. It's a real treat. He's an accomplished classical violinist, but he moonlights as a klezmer fiddler.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about soulful. Do you think that does this folk dancing have a spiritual aspect for you, or?
Yeah, sure. I guess I have. I mean, there's sort of like a bunch of different answers to that question. I do have connections with the so-called circle dancing or sacred dancing. Many years ago, back in the 80s, that whole movement started out of Findhorn, the Findhorn community in Scotland, and they were doing folk dances, but they weren't connected with the folk dance community, and they were just sort of doing them as spiritual exercises. And then finally their movement got so big that the two groups started to meet each other, and sometimes not on the friendliest terms. Sometimes there was like sort of conflict about the interpretations that were being put on dances and so forth. And so the sacred dance community ended up inviting me to come in as a sort of knowledgeable international dancer who also kind of understood what they were trying to do and sort of helped translate between those two worlds. And so I did a bunch of that. I taught a lot of workshops in France and Switzerland for those people. And actually next summer, for the first time, I'm actually going to go to Findhorn itself and teach a week of mostly Yiddish dancing, actually, is what they want me to do. And I think folk dancing has on its native soil, has always had a deep kind of, not just communal, but communing function. People connect with each other by moving together. And I think also deeply embedded in a lot of the traditional dancing is a lot of stuff that kind of defeats the rational mind. It's like there's a lot of stuff in traditional dancing where a pattern will be set up so that you have some expectation that it's going to repeat, and then it doesn't. It sort of defeats your expectations. And that, I think, sort of puts you in an altered state. It's sort of like, it's not predictable or not in an obvious way. And so it tends to kind of move you into this other realm. I think that's like deep inside the dances. People don't always talk about that, but I think it's there. In the Yiddish tradition, there are connections between, well, at least some parts of it, there are connections between the dancing and a whole spiritual movement in Jewish culture, the Hasidic movement. Not all Yiddish dancing is Hasidic. People don't always understand that, but some of it is, and a lot of it has, the music itself comes often out of liturgy, and is, and the same is true in Greek dancing. There are a lot of Greek dances that are where the music sort of, there's spillover between church music and folk music, and there are dances where people trace out crosses on the ground. I mean, there's not a hard line between one and the other. It's just people's lives and how they relate to it. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I'm dodging the question, but now in the U.S., it seems like obviously folk dancing is on the decline, especially during the younger people. And I didn't know if you had any. You've been in Europe, and I didn't know if there was anything that they're doing in Europe. Is it the same, or is it something that we could do here in the U.S. to try to increase participation of the younger crowd? That question gets me right where I live. I mean, I think I have a lot to say about that. I'll try to be brief. The situation in Europe is not the same as here. They've done a very, particularly, I would say, well, the communities that I know, Switzerland, Holland, France, Germany, they've done an incredible job of including young people. And I was saying that I've spent years teaching workshops over there, and I guess in the last maybe 10, 15 years, I found myself teaching workshops to the children of the people I used to teach the workshops to. It's like they've really succeeded in passing it on. The young people really own it and are excited by it, and it's a whole different scene. I think there are a couple of things that they've done well that sort of helped them do that. One of them in Holland, there was a folk dance college where you could actually get a degree and teach folk dancing in the schools. So there was like a tie-in for people to actually, and they had a lot of emphasis on pedagogy and how you teach dancing. So it was really a skill that they cultivated and then used that to, get young people involved, teach them the music, teach them how to play the music, teach them how to do the dancing, teach them how to lead dancing. And so there's just, they really cultivated it, and they've got a lot to show for that. I mean, young people are really involved, and this is not quite the same. It wasn't quite as formal in Switzerland, but the folk dance community in Switzerland grew out of school situations, and a lot of the people doing folk dance were school teachers. And so, again, there was a real tie-in, and I think, I did my part to help that. I kind of promoted passing it on to young people and including them and all of that, and it really worked. I mean, it's very different. I feel like it's very different there than here in the States. It's like the community's just getting older and older, and every so often there's one or two young people who come in, but it's not the same as having a kind of critical mass, which is really, really what you need. I still harbor dreams of like creating a sort of a camp for young people, or a training program, or a school, or something. It's very dear to my heart, and in some ways it breaks my heart that it hasn't been passed on. It's also, to some extent, there's like, people are, fashions change, and people get in, I think to make it interesting for young people, there has to be a certain amount of kind of mating and dating. Otherwise, they're not interested. So I think a lot of them have kind of drifted off into salsa or whatever it is, where they can interact and stuff. So I think there's another community that I think has done well in the States is the vintage dance community, and of course the contra dance community. I mean, around here, that's where the young people are. They're all contra dancing, right, at least around here. Currently I'm in a local choir, about 70 people in the choir, and it's not led by me, it's led by some young folks who do Appalachian music and gospel music and American stuff, but they also sing Balkan, and they sing Georgian music, and they sing South African music, and they dance. And now that I'm in the choir, when we do Balkan songs, I choreograph for them, and we do, so it's like that's starting to happen. I'm really glad something's happening. So.
Do you have any interesting stories or embarrassing stories or moments that you might want to share? Anything?
Crazy stories about dancing? I have one story that I think is probably my craziest story. I was teaching one of the winter camps in Switzerland, and they always have two main teachers. And it so happened that year, one of the Swiss organizers of the camp had just been to visit Nigeria. And they found a dancer and a drummer from Nigeria that they invited to come. Was it Nigeria? It might have been Ivory Coast. I forget. It was one of those West African countries. Ghana. Maybe it was Ghana. I don't know. I don't remember. Anyway, they hired these two people. The dancer was, I think, 19 years old, and her brother, the drummer, was like 17 or something. I mean, they were really young. They showed up in Switzerland in the dead of winter without shoes. They'd never seen snow before. They were just like completely out of their element. And we did this workshop up in this snowbound, remote village way up in the mountains in Switzerland. And I was teaching, among other things, Yiddish dance. They were teaching their stuff from, it was Ghana, I think. They were teaching their stuff from Ghana. And we also had a great Hungarian gypsy cymbalon player, Kalman Balog. He's like one of the greatest people. He drove all the way from Budapest and showed up there. And my son, I think, was maybe 11 back then. So he and Kalman were playing klezmer music for my Yiddish dance. Okay, so that's sort of like the scene. That was like the workshop. But in addition to that, during that week in that village in Switzerland, the local farmers have this ritual where they get completely plastered and they wear masks and they get their biggest cowbells out and they in unison go around the mountainside ringing, just deafeningly loud, ringing their cowbells to drive out the evil spirits. It's like it's pagan ritual, from pre-Christian pagan ritual. So needless to say, since we were these weird foreigners in this village, we were the evil spirit. I mean, they wanted to like clean us up. So part of the dance camps things was we always had a big dance party on New Year's Eve. So we were having this dance party. Kalman and my son Noah and a bunch of other people were playing this hot Yiddish music. I was leading the klezmer, you know, I don't know how many people we had, 120 people or something, doing klezmer, doing Yiddish dancing. And the farmers showed up at the door with their bells. And of course they were completely drunk. They just like barged in right into the middle of it. You know, it's like you couldn't hear anything. They barged right into the middle of our circle and started like just taking over and going through the whole house to drive out the evil spirits. Well, the 17-year-old kid drummer from Ghana thought this was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. He got in line behind them with his djembe. It was like it was like the biggest cultural hodgepodge I've ever seen. You know, this Ghana kid playing his djembe, the drunk Swiss farmers, the, you know, gypsy Hungarian guy, the Yiddish music. I mean, it was just pandemonium. It was all happening at once. And finally what happened was there was a group of Dutch musicians there who happened to know how to play Swiss folk music. So they managed to get the farmers down into our dining hall by playing Swiss music for them and serving them beer. So and so it sort of sorted itself out. They went into the basement and we got back to our dancing and it all kind of like ended peacefully. But it was just insane. It was such a crazy scene. Anyway.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So I think I guess my question is, so what keeps you dancing?
What keeps me dancing? I love the music. I love the connections with people. I love all the cultures. I love the diversity of the cultures and how I guess I've always felt about folk dancing is that and this is maybe a spiritual part of it, is it lets me stand in other people's shoes. It lets me feel what it's like to be in that culture in a way that doesn't require language, and it's just sort of like, here's what it feels like to be Greek or Polish or Gypsy or Armenian or whatever it is. And so it develops compassion. So sort of opens the heart.
Great, great.
Ai de dusho konya da ploda